Welcome to another story on Cheating Tales Lab. We're so happy to have you here, and today's story is one we think you'll really enjoy. So without further ado, let's begin. Ethan Reeves wiped his hands on a greasy rag, the smell of motor oil clinging to his skin like a second layer. The '67 Mustang gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights of the high-end auto restoration shop. He glanced at his watch, 8:45 p.m. Olivia would be wondering where he was. As if on cue, his phone buzzed. A text from his wife. Working late. Don't wait up. Ethan's jaw clenched. Third time this week. He typed back a terse okay, and tossed the phone onto his workbench with more force than necessary. The drive home was a blur of streetlights and racing thoughts. When he pulled into the driveway, the house was dark. Olivia's car was gone. Inside, Ethan poured himself a whiskey neat. He sank into his favorite armchair, the leather creaking under his weight. The house felt too quiet, too empty. His eyes landed on Olivia's open laptop on the coffee table. He shouldn't. He really shouldn't. But the whiskey burned away his reservations. Ethan leaned forward, tapping the space bar to wake the screen. A string of emails popped up. Nothing incriminating. But something about the tone of the exchanges with her co-workers seemed off. Too familiar, too flirtatious. A key in the lock made him snap the laptop shut. Olivia breezed in, her cheeks flushed and hair slightly disheveled. "Oh, you're still up," she said, surprise coloring her voice. "I thought I told you not to wait." Ethan forced a smile. "Just got in myself. Busy day at the shop." Olivia nodded, distracted. Her phone chimed and she glanced at it, a small smile playing at her lips before she quickly schooled her features. "I'm beat," she announced. "Heading to bed. Don't stay up too late." As she climbed the stairs, Ethan's eyes narrowed. The seeds of suspicion, once planted, began to take root. Over the next few weeks, Ethan found himself hyper-aware of Olivia's movements. Strange phone calls at odd hours became the norm. She'd step out onto the porch, speaking in hushed tones. When he'd ask who it was, she'd wave it off as work stuff with a tight smile. The work emergencies multiplied. Late nights at the office, sudden weekend meetings. Each time, Ethan's unease grew. One evening, as Olivia showered, Ethan found himself staring at her purse. The temptation to look inside gnawed at him. With a deep breath, he reached in and pulled out her wallet. Flipping it open, he found their shared credit card statement. His eyes widened as he scanned the charges. Upscale restaurants he'd never heard of, hotels in the city. His stomach churned. The sound of the shower stopping jolted him back to reality. He hastily shoved the statement back into her wallet and returned it to her purse, heart pounding. That night, as Olivia slept soundly beside him, Ethan made a decision. He'd crossed a line by looking at her wallet, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The next day, on his lunch break, he purchased a small GPS tracker. His hand shook slightly as he installed it in Olivia's car, in beneath the dashboard. The guilt of invading her privacy warred with his need to know the truth. Over the next week, Ethan obsessively checked the tracker's data. Most of Olivia's movements were innocuous. Her office, the gym, the grocery store. But then a pattern emerged. Frequent visits to an affluent neighborhood across town, always during her supposed late nights at the office. The final straw came when he checked their online banking and noticed a series of large transfers from their joint account to an account he didn't recognize. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. He needed answers, and he needed them now. The business card felt heavy in Ethan's hand. Mia Chun, private investigator. Her office was tucked away in a nondescript building downtown, the kind of place you'd walk by 100 times without noticing. Mia was all business, her dark eyes sharp as she listened to Ethan's suspicions. "I'll need a week," she said. "Maybe 2. I'll be discreet." Ethan nodded, swallowing hard. "Just find out the truth, whatever it is." The next 10 days were agony. Ethan went through the motions at work, his mind constantly elsewhere. He barely slept, lying awake listening to Olivia's steady breathing beside him, wondering if she was dreaming of someone else. When Mia finally called, her voice was grim. "I have what you need. Meet me at my office." The manila envelope Mia slid across her desk might as well have been filled with TNT. Ethan's hand shook as he opened it, spilling out a stack of high-resolution photos. Olivia, laughing over wine at a candlelit restaurant. Olivia, entering a hotel, a tall man's arm around her waist. Olivia, kissing that same man passionately in an elevator. "His name is Dr. Nathaniel Hawthorne," Mia said quietly. "He's a neurosurgeon at St. Mary's Hospital." Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. He recognized the name. Olivia had mentioned him in passing, a new doctor at her firm's biggest client. "I'm sorry," Mia added, genuine sympathy in her voice. Ethan nodded woodenly, gathering up the photos. "You did your job. Thank you." The drive home was a blur. Ethan's mind raced, replaying every moment of the past few months through this new, horrible lens. How long had it been going on? How could he have been so blind? Olivia was in the kitchen when he walked in, humming as she chopped vegetables for dinner. She looked up with a smile that quickly faded when she saw his expression. "Ethan, what's wrong?" He slapped the envelope down on the counter. "Care to explain?" Olivia's face went pale as she looked at the contents. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then her eyes hardened. "You had me followed? How dare you invade my privacy like that?" Ethan laughed bitterly. "Your privacy? That's rich, coming from someone who's been lying to my face for God knows how long." "It's not what you think," Olivia began, but Ethan cut her off. Don't you dare try to gaslight me. I've seen the evidence with my own eyes." Olivia's face crumpled. "Ethan, please. We can work through this. It was a mistake, I swear." But Ethan wasn't listening. His eyes had caught on Olivia's phone on the counter. Screen lit up with a new message. From Nate. In that moment, something in Ethan snapped. He grabbed the phone, ignoring Olivia's protests. "Warn Nathaniel," he read aloud, his voice dangerously calm. "About what exactly? The investigation? Or the fact that your idiot husband finally caught on?" Olivia's silence was all the confirmation he needed. Ethan set the phone down carefully, his mind already racing ahead to what needed to be done. "I'm going for a drive," he said flatly. "Don't wait up." As he walked out, he could hear Olivia on the phone behind him, her voice low and urgent, warning her lover, no doubt. Let her. It didn't matter now. Ethan drove aimlessly for hours, the betrayal eating away at him like acid. By the time he returned home in the early hours of the morning, his shock had crystallized into something harder, colder. A plan was forming in his mind. Olivia was asleep when he crept into the bedroom. In the pale moonlight, she looked peaceful, beautiful. Ethan felt a twinge of the love he'd once felt for her, quickly swallowed by a tide of bitter rage. He wouldn't confront her. Not yet. For now, he'd play the fool, the trusting husband. And all the while, he'd be planning for the day when he'd make them both pay for every lie, every betrayal. Ethan slipped into bed, his mind racing with possibilities. As he drifted off to an uneasy sleep, one thought echoed in his mind. Revenge would be sweet. Nature, it seemed, had a twisted sense of timing. 3 days after Ethan's world imploded, the skies opened up. Rain lashed against windows. Wind howled through trees, and the normally placid river that ran through town swelled to monstrous proportions. Ethan stood in the doorway of his shop, watching as muddy water crept ever closer. Most of the other businesses on the street had already evacuated, their owners fleeing with whatever valuables they could carry. Ethan, his boss Frank, shouted over the howling wind, "We gotta go, son. It's not safe." Ethan nodded numbly, taking one last look at the classic cars they'd worked so hard to restore. The '67 Mustang he'd just finished gleamed under the emergency lights, about to be swallowed by the flood. As they drove to higher ground, Ethan's phone buzzed. A text from Olivia. Are you safe? The hospital's evacuating non-critical patients. I'm helping coordinate. Might be late. He typed back a terse, I'm fine, and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. Let her worry. It was the least she deserved. The next few days were chaos. The flood ravaged the town, leaving destruction in its wake. Ethan's shop was hit hard, water and mud ruining years of work and hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of classic cars. When the waters finally receded, the full extent of the damage became clear. Frank stood in the middle of the ruined shop, his face ashen. I don't know if we can come back from this, Ethan, he said quietly. The insurance, it might not be enough. I might have to close up for good. Ethan felt a knot form in his stomach. The shop had been his life for years. The thought of losing it, on top of everything else. That evening, he sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by insurance forms and damage reports. Olivia bustled around, making coffee and fussing over him. Maybe this is a sign, she said tentatively. Maybe we should think about moving. Starting fresh somewhere new. Ethan's head snapped up. For a moment, he thought he saw a flicker of guilt in her eyes. Was she suggesting this out of remorse? Or was she looking for an easy way out? A chance to be closer to her lover? But then a thought struck him. A move that could work in his favor. Give him the space and time he needed to put his plan into action. You know what? He said, forcing a smile. Maybe you're right. A fresh start could be good for us. Olivia's relief was palpable. She reached across the table, squeezing his hand. We'll get through this together, honey. I promise. Ethan squeezed back, his mind already racing ahead. Yes, they'd move. And while Olivia thought they were working on their marriage, he'd be setting the stage for his revenge. Over the next few weeks, as they dealt with the aftermath of the flood, Ethan began quietly laying the groundwork for his plan. He started liquidating assets, squirreling away money in accounts Olivia didn't know about. He researched new identities, offshore banking, ways to disappear. All the while, he played the part of the devoted husband. He listened to Olivia's empty promises to work on their marriage, nodded along as she talked about couples therapy. He even managed to choke out, I love you when needed, though the words tasted like ash in his mouth. One night, as Olivia slept, Ethan found himself drawn to her laptop again. This time, he didn't hesitate. He needed information, ammunition for what was to come. What he found made his blood boil. Email after email between Olivia and Nathaniel, full of flowery declarations of love and explicit details of their encounters. But it was the financial information that really caught his eye. Olivia had been siphoning money from their joint accounts into a private one. Thousands of dollars, meant for their future, now earmarked for a life with another man. Ethan's hands shook as he copied down the account details. This was it, the final piece he needed. With this, he could destroy them both, financially, professionally, personally. As he closed the laptop, a calm settled over him. The path ahead was clear now. Olivia and Nathaniel thought they were so clever, so in control. They had no idea what was coming. Ethan slipped back into bed, his mind racing with plans. The perfect storm had given him the perfect opportunity. Now, all he had to do was wait for the right moment to strike. Ethan Reeves sat in the dark, the blue glow of his laptop screen illuminating his face. His fingers flew across the keyboard, crafting a digital persona with the precision of a master forger. Alex Sterling, venture capitalist extraordinaire, was coming to life. He'd always had a knack for computers, a hobby that had taken a back seat to his mechanical skills. Now, that hidden talent was the linchpin of his revenge. LinkedIn profile? Check. Carefully curated Twitter feed? Done. A sleek website for Sterling Ventures, complete with glowing testimonials from shell companies? Perfect. Ethan leaned back, admiring his handiwork. Alex Sterling was everything he wasn't. Wealthy, connected, and passionate about cutting-edge medical technology. The perfect bait for a certain ambitious neurosurgeon. He glanced at the clock. 3:47 a.m. Olivia would be waking up soon, heading to the hospital for her early shift. To her lover, Ethan's jaw clenched. He forced himself to take a deep breath. Patience. That's what this whole charade was about. Patience and planning. He navigated to Dr. Nathaniel Hawthorne's professional networking profile. His mouse hovered over the connect button. This was it. The first domino. Click. Across town in a luxurious penthouse apartment, Dr. Nathaniel Hawthorne's phone buzzed. He groaned, reaching for it blindly in the dark. Olivia stirred beside him. "What is it?" she mumbled sleepily. "Nothing, darling. Go back to sleep." Nathaniel squinted at the screen, a notification from his professional networking app catching his eye. A connection request from Alex Sterling? The name wasn't familiar, but the profile was intriguing. CEO of Sterling Ventures, specializing in medical technology investments. Nathaniel's heart raced. This could be the break he'd been waiting for. His research was groundbreaking, but funding was always an issue. If he could get an investor, like Sterling, interested, he accepted the request without hesitation, already composing a message in his head. This could change everything. Back in his home office, Ethan allowed himself a small, grim smile as the acceptance notification popped up. Hook, line, and sinker. Over the next few weeks, Alex and Nathaniel exchanged a flurry of messages. Ethan played his part perfectly, expressing keen interest in Nathaniel's research while dangling the possibility of substantial funding. Olivia noticed the change in her lover. Nathaniel was distracted, constantly checking his phone, staying late at the lab. "Is everything all right?" she asked one night over dinner at their favorite upscale restaurant, the same one where Ethan had first seen them together in Mia's photographs. Nathaniel's eyes gleamed with excitement. "Better than all right. I might have found an investor for my project. If this pans out, Olivia, we're talking millions in funding. It could change everything." Olivia's heart swelled. This was what she'd been waiting for. A chance to start over, to leave behind the guilt and the lies. "That's wonderful, Nate. Tell me everything." As Nathaniel launched into an explanation of neural interfaces and groundbreaking therapies, Ethan sat alone in his home office, monitoring their conversation through the bug he'd planted in Olivia's purse. His hands clenched into fists as he listened to them plan their future together. Soon, he thought, soon they'd see just how quickly dreams could turn to ashes. The next day, Alex sent Nathaniel a proposal, a chance to fast-track his research, to push the boundaries of what was possible. All he needed to do was bend a few rules, skirt a few ethical guidelines. Nathaniel hesitated. It was risky, if anyone found out, but the potential rewards were too great to ignore. With trembling hands, he replied to Alex, "I'm in." Ethan leaned back in his chair, a wolfish grin spreading across his face. The trap was set. Now, all he had to do was wait for his prey to stumble into it. Dr. Melissa Chung, head of the Medical Ethics Board at St. Mary's Hospital, frowned at her computer screen. The anonymous email she received was troubling, to say the least. Allegations of unethical research practices, patient safety concerns, forged consent forms, all pointing to one of their most prominent surgeons, Dr. Nathaniel Hawthorne. She'd always had reservations about Hawthorne. Brilliant, yes, but there was an arrogance to him that set her on edge. And now this. With a heavy sigh, she picked up her phone. "Sarah, get me the hospital administrator. We need to launch an investigation. And contact Dr. Hawthorne's department. All his research is to be put on hold, effective immediately." Across town, in his opulent office, Nathaniel's world was crumbling around him. His phone hadn't stopped ringing all morning. The ethics board, the hospital administrator, even the local medical licensing board, all demanding answers he couldn't give. How had they found out? He'd been so careful. A soft knock at the door made him jump. Olivia slipped in, her face pale with worry. "Nate, what's going on?" "There are rumors flying all over the hospital." Nathaniel said, "I don't know. Someone's accused me of—" "God, Olivia, it's bad. Falsifying data, endangering patients." They're saying I violated every ethical guideline in the book. Olivia's hand flew to her mouth. But that's not true, is it? Tell me it's not true. The silence that followed was deafening. Nate, he couldn't meet her eyes. I might have cut a few corners, pushed things a little faster than regulations allowed, but it was for the greater good. Don't you see? With Alex's funding, we were on the verge of a breakthrough. Olivia felt the floor drop out from under her. Alex? The investor? Nate, what have you done? Before he could answer, his phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. Check your email. With trembling fingers, Nathaniel opened his inbox. His blood ran cold. There, in his sent folder, was an email he had no memory of writing, addressed to the ethics board, the hospital administration, even local news outlets. A full confession of his misdeeds, along with, oh God, photos of him and Olivia in compromising positions, in his office, in on-call rooms. No, he whispered. No, no, no. Olivia peered over his shoulder, her face draining of color. How? Who? The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Ethan, it had to be. But how? How could he have orchestrated all of this? Across town, in a nondescript internet cafe, Ethan allowed himself a moment of satisfaction as he hit send on the final email. The dominoes were falling, faster and harder than even he had anticipated. He'd underestimated how quickly Nathaniel would compromise his ethics in pursuit of glory and funding. It had made his job almost too easy. A few well-placed keyloggers, some carefully timed system updates pushed to Nathaniel's devices, and he'd had access to everything. Emails, text messages, even webcam footage. The photos had been a stroke of luck. He hadn't expected them to be so careless, to flaunt their affair right under the noses of their colleagues. But their arrogance had played right into his hands. Now, it was time for the final blow. Olivia's phone buzzed. A notification from her banking app. With shaking hands, she opened it, already knowing what she would find. The secret account she'd set up, the one she'd been funneling money into for months, planning for a fresh start with Nathaniel, it was empty. Every last cent gone. A text message flashed across her screen. From Ethan. Thought you could hide it from me? Game over, Olivia. I want a divorce. Olivia's knees gave out. She sank to the floor of Nathaniel's office, her world collapsing around her. Nathaniel was too lost in his own panic to notice. His phone was ringing again. The hospital administrator, demanding he turn himself in for questioning. In that moment, as sirens began to wail in the distance, Olivia realized the true extent of her mistakes. She'd thrown away a good man, a good life for this, a house of cards built on lies and betrayal, now crumbling to dust. The garage was silent save for the soft clink of tools and the occasional muffled curse. Ethan wiped sweat from his brow, stepping back to admire his handiwork. The 1969 Chevrolet Camaro gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, its midnight blue paint job flawless. To the untrained eye, it was simply a beautifully restored classic. But Ethan knew better. Every inch of this car had been modified, the engine tuned for maximum performance and minimal noise. The gas tank expanded and reinforced. Hidden compartments built into the doors, the trunk, even under the seats. A state-of-the-art GPS scrambler and a top-of-the-line communications system, all carefully concealed. This wasn't just a car. It was an escape plan on wheels. Ethan ran his hand along the smooth fender, a bittersweet smile playing at his lips. In another life, he might have restored this beauty out of pure love for the craft. Now, it was just another tool in his arsenal, a means to an end. He glanced at his watch. 2:17 a.m. In a few hours, the world would wake up to find Ethan Reeves had vanished into thin air. The new driver's license felt strange in his hands. Gabriel Foster, it proclaimed in bold letters. Born in Oregon, recently moved to Colorado. A successful classic car restorer, looking to start fresh in a new city. Ethan, no! Gabriel now took one last look around the garage. 5 years of his life, packed into boxes and duffel bags. Everything else had been sold, donated, or simply left behind. No loose ends. He'd been tempted to leave a note. For Olivia, for his former colleagues, for anyone who might wonder what had become of Ethan Reeves. But in the end, he decided against it. Let them wonder. Let them feel a fraction of the uncertainty and betrayal he'd experienced. The Camaro's engine purred to life, a sound so smooth it was barely audible. Gabriel eased it out of the garage and onto the quiet, pre-dawn streets. As he drove past Olivia's house one last time, he allowed himself a moment of reflection. 5 years of marriage, a lifetime of memories, all reduced to ashes by her betrayal. He thought of Olivia and Nathaniel, probably huddled together in some lawyer's office, trying to salvage what was left of their reputations and careers. Let them have each other, he thought bitterly. They deserved no better. The for sale sign on their front lawn flickered in his headlights as he drove past. Another piece of bait. He'd hired a realtor under a false name, left instructions for the proceeds of the sale to be donated to a local children's hospital. It would keep the authorities guessing, wondering if he'd fled the country. As the town limits approached, Gabriel felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Ethan Reeves was dead. His old life, his pain, his betrayal, all of it left behind in the pre-dawn darkness. The open road stretched before him, promising freedom, a new beginning. Gabriel Foster pressed down on the accelerator, the Camaro responding with a throaty growl. He didn't look back. In the days and weeks that followed, the disappearance of Ethan Reeves became the talk of the town. Theories ran wild. Had he embezzled money and fled to South America? Been the victim of foul play? Gone into witness protection? Olivia found herself at the center of a storm of gossip and speculation. The details of her affair with Dr. Hawthorne had leaked, adding fuel to the fire. Every pitying glance, every whispered conversation that stopped when she entered a room was a fresh torment. She'd tried to access the money she'd squirreled away, hoping to hire a private investigator to find Ethan. But the account was empty, cleaned out without a trace. She was left with nothing but questions and regrets. Nathaniel was no help, his career in tatters. Facing potential criminal charges, he'd retreated into himself. The passion that had drawn Olivia to him had curdled into bitterness and self-pity. As she sat alone in their now empty house, surrounded by for sale signs and packed boxes, Olivia felt the full weight of her choices crash down upon her. She'd thrown away a good man, a good life for, what? A fantasy that had crumbled like a house of cards. For the first time, she allowed herself to consider the possibility that Ethan's disappearance wasn't just about running away. The precision of it all, the way he dismantled their lives so thoroughly. This was revenge, served cold and calculated. Olivia shivered, wrapping her arms around herself. Wherever Ethan was, whatever he'd become, she had a sinking feeling that this was far from over. Miles away, on a winding mountain road, Gabriel Foster smiled as he caught a glimpse of his new home city in the distance. The Camaro purred beneath him, eating up the miles. A new life awaited, and with it, the next phase of his plan. The growl of a finely tuned engine echoed through the cavernous workshop as Gabriel Foster eased a gleaming 1970 Dodge Challenger onto the lift. He killed the ignition, the sudden silence broken only by the soft ping of cooling metal. 5 years. 5 years since he'd left behind the life of Ethan Reeves. 5 years of building a new identity from the ground up. Gabriel Foster, classic car restoration expert, was now a fixture in this small Colorado town. His business was thriving, his reputation impeccable. He wiped his hands on a rag, surveying his domain. Rows of vintage beauties in various states of repair filled the shop. This was his life now. Simple, uncomplicated, no betrayals, no lies. The crunch of gravel outside pulled him from his reverie. Probably Mrs. Hadley, coming to check on her husband's prize Mustang. Gabriel plastered on his best customer service smile and turned towards the door. The smile froze on his face. The young man who walked in couldn't have been more than 20. Shaggy brown hair, intense green eyes that sparked with a familiar fire. Gabriel felt his stomach lurch. It was like looking at a ghost of his younger self. "Can I help you?" he managed, his voice steadier than he felt. The young man's eyes darted around the shop before settling on Gabriel. "Are you Ethan Reeves?" The name hit Gabriel like a physical blow. He hadn't heard it spoken aloud in years. "I think you got the wrong." "Don't bullshit me," the kid snarled, taking a step closer. "I know who you are. I've spent years tracking you down." Gabriel's mind raced. How had he slipped up? What trail had he left behind? He'd been so careful. "My name is Lucas," the young man continued, his voice shaking slightly. "I'm your son." The world tilted on its axis. Gabriel, no, Ethan, because who was he kidding now? Gripped the edge of a nearby workbench to steady himself. A son? Impossible. Olivia had never been pregnant. Had she? That's not possible, he said, hating how weak his voice sounded. Lucas barked out a harsh laugh. "Yeah, that's what Mom said you'd probably say. Deadbeat dad denies everything, right?" Ethan's shock was quickly replaced by a familiar anger. Of course Olivia would do this. One last twisted knife in his back. "How old are you?" he asked, buying time as his mind whirled. 21 next month, Lucas replied, a hint of defiance in his tone. The math didn't add up. If this kid was telling the truth, he would have been born well before Ethan and Olivia even met, which meant a cold certainty settled over Ethan. He knew exactly what game was being played here. "What do you want, Lucas?" he asked, his voice flat. The young man's bravado faltered slightly. Mom's sick. Cancer. The treatments are expensive, and I'm trying to put myself through college. We need help. You owe us that much, at least." Ethan almost laughed at the audacity of it all. Olivia, using her own son as a pawn in one last desperate grab. He wondered if the kid even knew the full story, or if he was just an unwitting puppet in his mother's schemes. "And if I refuse?" Ethan asked, curious to see how far the charade would go. Lucas's jaw clenched. "Then I'll go to the police. Child abandonment. I'll sue you for back child support. I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of man Ethan Reeves really is." Now Ethan did laugh, a short, bitter sound that made Lucas take a step back. "Kid, you have no idea what kind of man Ethan Reeves really is. But I'll tell you what, come back tomorrow. I'll have something for you then." Lucas hesitated, clearly thrown off by this response. You're not denying it." Ethan shook his head. "Go home, Lucas. Tell your mother you found me. Come back tomorrow at noon, and we'll settle this once and for all." After a moment of tense silence, Lucas nodded jerkily and turned to leave. At the door, he paused. "Don't try to run. I'll find you again." Ethan watched him go, a storm of emotions swirling in his chest. When the sound of Lucas's car had faded, he pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "Mia? It's E.T. It's Gabriel. I need one more favor." The next day, precisely at noon, Lucas stood in Gabriel's workshop, radiating nervous energy. His eyes darted around the room, taking in the tools, the half-restored cars, searching for, what? A sign of the father he'd never known? Some tangible connection to the man who'd abandoned him and his mother? Gabriel watched him silently for a moment, struck again by the physical resemblance. It was uncanny, really, if he hadn't known better. "Sit down, Lucas," he said, gesturing to a pair of battered office chairs in the corner. "We need to talk." Lucas complied, his earlier bravado seemingly diminished in the harsh light of day. Gabriel took the seat across from him, a manila envelope in his hands. "Before we start, I want you to know that I'm sorry," Gabriel began. Lucas's head snapped up, hope flaring in his eyes. "You are?" Gabriel nodded solemnly. "I'm sorry that your mother has put you in this position. I'm sorry that she's used you as a pawn in her games. And I'm sorry for what I'm about to tell you, because it's going to hurt. but you deserve the truth. He opened the envelope and pulled out a sheet of paper, handing it to Lucas. The young man's brow furrowed as he scanned the document. What is this? It's a DNA test result, Gabriel said quietly, performed by one of the most reputable labs in the country. It proves conclusively that I am not your biological father. Lucas's face went pale, then flushed with anger. This is bullshit. You faked this. You're just trying to weasel out of your responsibilities. Gabriel shook his head. I wish it were that simple, kid. But think about it. You said you're almost 21. That means you were born in 2003, right? Lucas nodded warily. I didn't even meet your mother until 2016. We were married in 2018. The math doesn't add up, Lucas. It never did. But Mom said... Your mother lied, Gabriel said, his voice gentle but firm. She's been lying to you for a long time, I suspect. Lucas slumped in his chair, the fight draining out of him. Why would she do that? Gabriel sighed. That's a long story, one I'm not sure you're ready to hear. But I think you need to. Over the next hour, Gabriel, no Ethan, because there was no point in pretending anymore, told Lucas everything. The affair, the betrayal, the elaborate revenge plot. He spared no details, laying bare the ugly truth of it all. Lucas listened in stunned silence, his face a kaleidoscope of emotions, shock, disbelief, anger, grief. When Ethan finished, Lucas sat motionless for a long moment. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he asked, So who is my real father? Ethan's jaw clenched. Based on the timeline and everything else I know, I'd say it's almost certainly Dr. Nathaniel Hawthorne. Lucas's head snapped up. Mom's boss? The one she's been with since. Since before I left, yes, Ethan confirmed. I'm sorry, Lucas. You deserve better than this. The young man stood abruptly, pacing the small office area. All these years, she told me you ran out on us, that you couldn't handle the responsibility. I've hated you my whole life for abandoning us. And now you know the truth, Ethan finished softly. It's not an easy thing to face, believe me, but it's better than living a lie. Lucas turned to him, his eyes shining with unshed tears. What am I supposed to do now? Mom's sick. She needs help. And I don't even know who I am anymore. Ethan stood, placing a hesitant hand on Lucas's shoulder. You're the same person you've always been, Lucas. Your mother's lies don't change who you are. As for what to do, I think you need to have a long talk with Dr. Hawthorne, and with your mother. Lucas nodded numbly. Yeah, I guess I do. As Lucas turned to leave, Ethan called out, Wait. He went to his desk, pulled out a checkbook, and quickly wrote something. Here, he said, handing the check to Lucas. It's not much, but it should cover your next semester of college, at least. Whatever else has happened, none of this is your fault. You shouldn't have to put your life on hold because of your parents' mistakes. Lucas stared at the check, then back at Ethan. Thank you. I don't know what to say. Ethan shook his head. You don't have to say anything. Just live your life, Lucas. Don't let the bitterness consume you. Trust me, I know how tempting that can be. After Lucas left, Ethan sank back into his chair, suddenly feeling every one of his years. He'd thought his revenge was complete, that he'd put the past behind him. But seeing the pain in Lucas's eyes, the devastation of a young man whose world had just been turned upside down for the first time, Ethan wondered if the cost of his vengeance had been too high. He shook off the thought. What was done was done. He couldn't change the past. All he could do was move forward. But as he turned back to his work, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Not yet. The call came on a crisp autumn morning, 6 months after Lucas's visit. Ethan was elbow deep in the engine of a '65 Shelby Cobra when his phone buzzed. He almost ignored it, but something made him reach for it. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, professional. A doctor from his old hometown. Olivia was dying. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. She didn't have long, and she was asking for him. Ethan's first instinct was to hang up, to pretend he'd never received the call. He'd put that life behind him. Olivia's fate was no longer his concern, but as he stared at the Cobra's gleaming engine, he realized he couldn't let it end like this. There were things that needed to be said, a final reckoning to be had. The drive back to his old hometown was surreal. Familiar landmarks blurred past, ghosts of a life long abandoned. Ethan felt like a stranger in his own skin. Ethan Reeves and Gabriel Foster warring for dominance with each mile that passed. St. Mary's Hospital loomed before him, a place he'd only visited in nightmares for the past 5 years. As he walked through the sterile corridors, the smell of disinfectant and despair assaulting his senses, Ethan steeled himself for what was to come. Room 437. He paused outside the door, his hand on the handle. It wasn't too late to turn back, to drive away and never look back. But he'd come this far. He needed to see it through. Olivia lay in the hospital bed, a pale shadow of the woman he'd once loved. Tubes and wires snaked from her frail body, monitors beeping a soft, steady rhythm. Her eyes were closed, but they fluttered open as he approached. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. "You came." He stood at the foot of her bed, hands gripping the railing. "I came." Silence stretched between them. Years of unspoken words and buried emotions threatening to suffocate them both. Finally, Olivia spoke again. "I'm sorry. For everything. I know it doesn't change anything, but I needed you to hear it." Ethan's jaw clenched. "You're right. It doesn't change anything." Olivia's eyes filled with tears. "I've lost everything, Ethan. Nathaniel left when the money ran out. Lucas won't speak to me. Not since he found out the truth. And whose fault is that?" Ethan's voice was cold. "You lied to everyone, Olivia. You betrayed me. You used your own son as a pawn. Did you really think there wouldn't be consequences?" She turned her face away, shame etched in every line. "I didn't think. I was selfish and scared, and I'm paying for it now. We all are." Ethan felt his carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. He had imagined this moment so many times over the years, dreamed of standing over Olivia's broken form and feeling nothing but satisfaction. But now, faced with the reality, "Do you know what you did to me?" he asked, his voice low and intense. "Do you have any idea what it's like to have your entire world shattered? To realize that everything you believed in was a lie?" Olivia met his gaze, her eyes clear despite the pain medication coursing through her system. "I think I do now." Ethan laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Poetic justice, I suppose. You reap what you sow, Olivia." "Is that why you're here?" she asked. "To watch me suffer? To make sure I die alone and in pain?" For a moment, Ethan was tempted to say yes, to twist the knife one last time. But as he looked at Olivia, withered and frail in her hospital bed, he felt the last of his anger drain away, replaced by a bone-deep weariness. "No," he said softly. "I'm here because despite everything, we shared a life once. And I needed to know that it meant something, that it wasn't all a lie." Olivia reached out a trembling hand. After a moment's hesitation, Ethan took it. "It wasn't all a lie," she whispered. "I did love you, Ethan. Maybe not enough, maybe not the right way, but I did. And I'm so sorry for what I did to you, to us." Ethan nodded, not trusting himself to speak. They sat in silence for a long moment, the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor, the only sound in the room. Finally, Ethan stood. "I should go." Panic flashed in Olivia's eyes. Will you come back?" Ethan hesitated. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I don't think so. This is goodbye, Olivia." She nodded, tears streaming down her gaunt cheeks. "I understand. Thank you, Ethan, for coming, for everything." He paused at the door, looking back at the woman who had once been the center of his world. "Goodbye, Olivia." I hope you find peace. As Ethan walked out of the hospital, he felt as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. The thirst for vengeance that had driven him for so long was finally quenched, leaving behind a strange, hollow feeling. He climbed into his modified Camaro, the engine purring to life beneath him. As he pulled out of the parking lot, Ethan caught a glimpse of his reflection in the rearview mirror. The man looking back at him was neither Ethan Reeves nor Gabriel Foster. He was someone new, someone forged in the fires of betrayal and tempered by the cold waters of revenge. The open road stretched before him, full of possibilities. Ethan, or whoever he was now, put the car in gear and drove towards the setting sun, leaving the ghost of his past behind once and for all. As the town faded in his rearview mirror, Ethan realized that the end of his revenge wasn't the end of his story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter. And for the first time in years, he found himself looking forward to what came next. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.